Welcome everybody. We'll just give it a few more minutes to wait for people to arrive. Just give it one more minute and then I'll make a start. Great, we'll make a start then. I've got a witter on for a bit, so that'll allow time for attendees to arrive before we get to the meat of the session. So my name's Alistair Mumford. I work for Devon County Council and I'm the project manager for AgroRES. So AgroRES is a Interreg Europe, a European funded project that's looking to support the deployment of renewable energy on the agricultural sector. So how can we help the landowners and farmers to use more renewable energy to obviously to deliver carbon savings, but also added benefits, numerous added benefits as well. So this is our third webinar as part of a series of webinars around that theme. And this one is going to be on onshore wind, which I'm really pleased to be doing, and it's very exciting to be here. As we saw recently, with the Prime Minister seeming to get very excited about offshore wind, which is very welcome, but no mention really of onshore wind so far. As I'm sure many on the call today can remember, back in 2015, 2016, it was Conservative MPs, maybe some from Devon, who knows, who put pressure on the government to stop onshore wind development, and that resulted in planning barriers being put in place that really just restricted onshore wind development to areas designated by local authorities and needed to have clear local support. And around about the same time, we also saw subsidies being scrapped as well. And Regen, who were back then were called Regen Southwest, now called Regen. They've looked into this, and only 3 onshore wind farms were completed in 2019. And of that, only 1 was under the current wind policy, and this was an extension. Specifically in Devon, the last wind turbine development was Batsworthy Cross of about 9 turbines, and that started operating in 2016. But could things be changing? Hopefully, yes. From a planning point of view, we were here today about the amazing work happening up in Avonmouth. And also there's talk of the government potentially opening up the subsidies, the current auction scheme to onshore wind in 2021. So could this all be a sort of positive signs, really? Well, let's hope so. And our speakers today will be going through, we're giving you a sort of how-to guide around onshore wind, the developments, the technology, what to look for, sites, that kind of thing. We'll also be looking into the legal aspects to it, and then a deep dive, one of my favorite bits of jargon, into the planning, the important area of planning, and then, getting the lowdown, getting the lessons learned from the work up in Avonmouth, which is really good work that's happened there. So just a slight bit of housekeeping. I'm sure we're all very experienced with Zoom now. If you can put your questions through the Q&A box, which should be at the bottom of your window. If you've got any comments and you want to speak to other people who are participating today, then you're more than welcome to use the chat function. But try and keep the questions to the Q&A bit. That makes it just a little bit easier for me to manage, and I do like things to be easy. We also would like to get we're going to be recording today as well, and that will go out afterwards. You'll get a link to that if that would be of use to you as well, and there'll be further information about AgroRES and talk a little bit more about some of the potential future webinars that we've got. Just what would be useful for me and for the speakers, probably just like to do a quick poll just to find out sort of where you are from. So it should be on your screens now. So whether you're a developer, and that could be a small developer or a big developer or a community developer, whether you're a landowner, whether you're sort of involved with support services, so consultancy, legal, that kind of area, or whether you're a manufacturer. I'll be very interested if there's any manufacturers, and then an installer. You're sticking wind turbines in the ground over the country. So just give it a few more seconds. I didn't think we'd have any manufacturers. Let's give a few more. I think that's everybody. Grand, let's share. So yes, I've got a few developers there, got a few landowners and support services as well. Thank you very much for that. That's really useful, and it will be for our speakers. And then the next one we'd like to do just really around your experience or your involvement with onshore wind. So have you been involved in projects in the past? Do you just not see onshore wind as being viable? Are you interested in developing a project going forward? Or maybe you're involved with a live project at the moment, getting something off the ground. So just give it a few seconds to complete that one. Great. Okay, I will end it there. Grand. So great to see so many people being involved in projects in the past and obviously interested in developing some new projects. So let's, with that in mind, let's get on and with the presentation. So we've got a number of presentations for you. We've got Daniel will be first from Pure Energy Professionals with a sort of how-to, then Sonia on the legals, and then Gemma, Dave and Charles talking about the planning and obviously specifically in relation to Ambition Community Energy's work. So yeah, we'll start with Daniel then, if you want to share your screen, Daniel. So Daniel, as I say, works for Pure Energy Professionals Limited, involved with multi-megawatt scale wind projects, so through from procurement all the way through to pre-construction. And he's also advised on over 1,600 megawatts of wind project transactions throughout the UK, Europe and North America. So thanks very much, Dan. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Okay, so yeah, thank you for having me today. Welcome. As I said, my name is Daniel. Just for a quick intro as to who Pure Energy Professionals are. We've been around for the last 30 years as a renewable energy company. I've been with the team for about the last 15 of those. We're a full project lifecycle company, so we co-develop, we develop, finance, construct, operate projects. We do a lot of due diligence. Currently, one of our sort of top clients will be IKEA. We've helped them spend over €1.5 billion on about 1 gigawatt of wind power farms across Europe and North America. bizarrely, that's all come through a little office in West Cornwall, which we're quite proud of. We do a lot of operations and asset management. We're currently operating 25 projects across the UK. We also oversee IKEA's portfolio across the world. We do a lot of mergers, acquisition, partnerships, and basically we bring people with money and people with projects together. And there's some fancy numbers at the bottom there, which are actually a little bit out of date now. So why are we here? There is now an unquestionable need for more renewable energy. The climate change is happening. The world has changed in the last few years. People are really waking up, and we have now net zero targets, carbon neutrality targets, and some of those are really ambitious. I mean, different parts of the country, different regions have got different targets, but most people are trying to aim now for, certainly in the Southwest, carbon neutrality, carbon zero, net zero by 2030. And we've got a lot to do if we're going to hit that. And we're not going to achieve that. I believe we're not going to achieve any of those net zero or climate change emergency targets without using wind power. Well, why wind power? Well, it's the lowest cost of renewable energy. It's the best use of land, and you can still grow food. This slide, this chart here, if I just draw your attention to it more than anything else, is how much electricity can be generated per hectare of land use from different renewable energy technologies. And well, this point here says that wind power generates almost 30 times as much electricity as solar per hectare of land used. Now, solar is good, don't get me wrong, and it could be quite contentious to a lot of people. But these numbers are right, and if you want to talk about it, I can talk you through how I calculated these numbers. Please do get in touch later on. Know that renewables is popular, and it's always been popular since this is a public attitudes tracker that the government have been running for the last 10 or 12 years. Every few months they come out with a new one of these. 80% strong, support strongly in favour of renewables. This is renewable energy in total. Up until a couple of years ago, they used to focus and split it out onto wind power and different technologies. And this is our problem here. We've got a couple of percent of very noisy people that tend to oppose these things, and they're the ones that really make our life much harder when it comes to it. But the overwhelming takeaway is that people are in support of renewable energy. So how do we develop a site? Initial site suitability. First of all, wind. It's got to be a windy site. Even more so now than a few years ago, because there's no market incentives anymore. The feed-in tariff and other things dropped away. There are turbines that have been built in much lower wind speeds than we would need to look at now. We would generally look at 6.5 meters a second. This here is a graphical representation of the Garrisand wind map. Every 100 meters square in the UK has been mapped, modelled for wind speeds. And that's one of the things that we use when first assessing a site. Previously, one of the models that was used was called knowable. That was every 1,000 meter squares. It's not as bankable. It's not bankable at all, but I mean, it gives a good indication. But this GH wind map is it's very good for this sort of particular issue. There's so many more other things that you need to consider. Throwing a few of them there, but none of them are more important than the holy trinity of land, planning, and grid connection. So, project management. If you're going to be developing any wind projects, you need a decent project manager in your team. Unless you've done it all before, you need someone in your team who has done it all before. PP has, just to let you know, but there's many others that have also done this. And the due diligence that we've done in the past means that we've seen also a lot of examples of projects that have been developed. They've got, they've got land agreements, they've got grid connection, they've got planning consent, but they can't be financed because potentially, there've been corners that have been cut during development just to get that planning consent, and then the developer wants to sell it on, but it can't be financed because or it can't be constructed because there's issues. So a good project manager will ensure that the project that's being developed can actually be financed, can actually be constructed, and can actually be operated. Again, we've seen projects in the past where a rogue construction manager has not done appropriate Q&A, sort of quality assurance on their projects, and the project haven't been built. Good project manager will make sure that all the relevant people, all the relevant silos are actually working together, and will be the bridge between all of those. So how do we develop a site? Very basic site design. There'll be a landowner will come along with a site, give us a nice site boundary. Then need to look at where the landowner's house is. Importantly, really importantly, neighbouring houses are. Actually, this one here has got a little campsite down on one side of it, and we need to address these local neighbouring properties for impacts against noise and amenity. Now, turbines aren't noisy, but they do produce a little bit of noise, and that needs to be considered. So we have to put buffers around these sites, these houses. We very first pass, we'll look at about 500 meters. That's often enough. Sometimes, in some occasions, it's not. So you get a bit bigger. But anyway, the landowner is also afforded a bit of protection from noise regulations, that you can't build too close to their house. And also, we can't stick a turbine right on a boundary. It's got to be inset so blades aren't overflying neighbours. Now, this particular site is a bit interesting. It's got a couple of operational wind turbines next door. This landowner thought, well, my neighbour can do it, I'd like to do it as well. However, we can't just go putting other wind turbines up that may impact existing ones, because the owner of these turbines will say, well, hang on, you're going to steal our wind, you're going to impact on our turbines. So that's why we put a buffer around here. This is 500 metre buffer. Well, on this one, it's 5 times rotor diameter as a rule of thumb. So pretty quickly, we can see that takes up a lot of space, and there's not a lot left over. What was a decent area of land is now quite a small area of thing to choose from. So let's just throw a few turbines at it. That's the best we can manage on this site. If anything, these two are a little bit close together. Maybe throughout development and further constraints mapping, we may have to drop one of these. Noise modelling, it's right on the boundary of this buffer here. It may go, it may stay, we'll see. This site also has got wooded areas. There'll be ecological constraints, but Jen will be talking about that a little bit later on when she talks about planning. So we've got a very basic site design here, something that we might want to run with. So we have a chat with the landowner. This is what we're keen on. Let's option up some land. Again, Sonia a bit later on, we're talking more about land agreements and options. But we want to make sure we've got enough space for moving turbines around, changing the layout slightly, opening up the access. Access is hugely important in designing a site. This particular site's got a nice road running right the way through it. There's no point in having a really great wind site if you can't get to it. So anyway, that's roughly how we'll approach a site to start with. Then we do more detailed constraints mapping, technical, environmental, ecological constraints, bring it all together, statutory designated land, things like that. Bit of shadow flicker analysis. We can't make sure that neighbouring properties aren't affected by shadow flicker. Aviation and communication. This early consultation is necessary for talking to the MOD and the Civil Aviation Authority, because you may need to alter your layout. A huge part of the country is covered by some form of radar, and if your turbines potentially can impact on those radars. If you look above yourselves, there's a bird's nest of invisible microwave links that you've got to mitigate against. Again, you might be able to move turbines slightly or put up other link deflectors in different parts of the country, not too far away from your site to divert the links around. But these are all things that need to be considered again for in the capex and the opex of the project, because these certain mitigations can have a cost impact later on. So going back to that holy trinity, grid connection. Right from the very start, as soon as you start deciding what it is you're going to be able to build there, you need to start talking to the DNO. Now, feasibility studies, you can get them to be done, you can do them yourselves if you've got the internal resources, but you're going to very quickly in the southwest particularly be told that there isn't much room. There's not, the grid is full, there's constraints everywhere. You can challenge that early on, but get your connection off for your application in as early as you can once you've got your design freeze, and it's more than likely you're going to get a ridiculous offer back or a statement saying there is insufficient capacity to do anything in the area. You've just got to challenge it. Western Power, SSE in the south here are both renowned for, over the last few years, especially making life difficult for developers trying to do wind power. But again, if you've got the relevant experience in your team to talk, you can use independent consultants or you can use your own team members if you've got them. Challenge the offers, negotiate with the DNOs, and demonstrate that your project is going to be acceptable. It may come down to a cost basis, it may come down to other aspects of network management you may have to come across, but there's nearly always a way around it. Now, just as a very quick examples, a couple of things that we were involved in during the FIT boom a few years ago. There is insufficient capacity in the network without significant upgrades. That was a recurrent theme for many of the projects that we were involved in. And we got a couple of ridiculous offers that was 1.7, 1.3 million, that basically Western Power saying they're putting it in the too difficult to deal with or not enough time to deal with pile, and just trying to see if the developer would go away. Well, we weren't in the position of going to go away. We weren't going to take no for the answer. 1.7, 1.3 million pounds is going to kill the project economics, make it unviable. We had meetings, we had discussions with the DNOs. We looked at the documentation, of what they were able to provide us and what we knew ourselves from our own research, and eventually we got them to requote and requote again until we got it down to 22,000 pounds. I mean, they're extreme examples, and I'm not going to say that's always going to happen, but it's possible if you negotiate and then you don't just sit back and take no for an answer from the DNOs, because being a wind developer, the grid isn't necessarily set up to easily accept distributed generation, and a lot of work needs to be done to the grid to allow it to be distributed generation to be built. And DNOs used to be a lot more set in their ways. They are certainly coming around to the idea of putting in more renewables right now. But it's important you sit and you talk to them and work out ways around the problems that they're having. Another issue that they often have is that they tend to be understaffed on land as well. I mean, again, a couple of projects here, slightly larger than the bit schemes there that we're talking about, but the points of connection were quite a distance away, and we still had deadlines we wanted to meet for construction, and the DNO was saying, well, yes, it's 6 kilometers away, and you're going to cross multiple landowners. It's going to take us some years to get all the land agreements in place and build it. Well, in this case, a good project manager has to act as basically a land agent for the DNO, negotiate multiple land deals, contracts, just in order to be able to allow the DNO to cross those lands with the DNO cable. I mean, this is not a project-owned cable. This is a cable owned by a DNO that's going to be, and yet it's still the project owner, the developer, the project manager that has to do this work on behalf of the DNO. Otherwise, it could take years. And we don't want it to take years. We haven't got time right now. It could take years. It needs to be done quickly. So that brings us a bit onto land. Sonia's going to talk a bit more about land shortly. A lot of projects don't just require one landowner. Multiple landowners can make larger projects. If a landowner has got neighbouring landowners that are agreeable to club together, make a larger project. This particular one here is only a 3-turbine project, but we have 3 landowners. One landowner with 1 turbine on his land, one landowner with 2 turbines on his land, another landowner, no turbines, but essential for the access. this other project down here, it was a slightly larger site. I think that was 11 turbines. Again, the landowners together had 2 turbines, 3 turbines, 5 turbines, something like that on their site, and the access route and a substation. Bringing it all together makes a decent, viable project. Not saying that one landowner is not enough. Just been involved in a project up in Scotland of 59 turbines of one landowner. But then I'm looking at a project in Ireland right now, there's 100 landowners. So, I mean, there's things in between. One landowner is good, several landowners joining together is equally as good if it makes a project better size.
2 minutes, Daniel. Yeah.
Right on, I'm done. Anyway, so that's me winding up now anyway. So just a few things if you've got to take away from what I've been saying here is that wind power, it generates 30 times as much electricity as solar per hectare of land used. We're not going to get anywhere near our net zero or other climate emergency targets without using wind power. And if you're going to start building wind projects or developing wind projects, ensure that you've got a project that is being developed that can actually be financed, constructed, and operated. Happy to take any questions now or later on, or even drop me an email later on. But thank you for your time.
Yeah. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you. Yeah, we'll just take maybe one. Well, there's a couple of techie ones which I might leave you to do while we're having the next presentation. So if you have a look in the Q&A one, or
I'll stop sharing now.
Yeah, if you stop sharing now, that's great. But yeah, one question from Stephen Snowden. The 500-meter offset from residential properties seems very low. Mm-hmm. Turbines are now 150-meter plus tall with capacities 4.2 megawatts and above. I would have thought that a minimum standoff distance of at least 100,000 meters would be required to avoid a development being viewed as potentially failing the lavender test, irrespective of noise. Do you want to quickly make a comment on that, Daniel?
Well, I agree. The 500 meters that I put there on that particular example was a very first pass, and if you're going to be going up to 140 meter tip turbines, yes, I mean 500 meters would be too close. But there's, if we start immediately screening out every single piece of land that's 1,000 meters from a residence, there's nothing going to be left, really, not a lot. And right now we are really keen to try and develop as much as we possibly can, because there is, we've got climate change emergency net zero targets to achieve, and we're not going to do it by we're not going to do it totally by the old rules. We can't. We have to be pushy as much as we possibly can. Yes, there are regulations that need to be followed and policy that needs to be followed, but there's also regulations and policy that need to be challenged as well. And we have to take a slightly bullish approach and take the knockbacks if they come. But if we don't start somewhere, we're not going to get anywhere at all.
No, very fair point. And then, so if you have a look in the Q&A, it's just a question around the calcs for your energy per hectare, and then the wind modelling system. But one from Al's Parker then, which of the active air bases MOD radar in the southwest? I imagine there's plenty in some ways, down in Cornwall particularly, and then over in Somerset.
There's the Newquay Airport is an important one. There's various primary radars up along the north coast of Cornwall, and also in mid-central Devon as well. Bristol Airport has an area that stretches out quite a way as well. But there's actually freely easily available mapping online from NATS that show where primary radars are and things like that, and then early consultation with Defence Estates for the MOD and Civil Aviation Authority will identify everything that needs to be considered.
Great, thank you, Daniel. Grant. Okay, yeah. So there's a couple of other little points there, Daniel. If you could have a look in the Q&A section and maybe answer those if you can.
Okay, will do.
So Sonia, checking you're there. If you would like to share your screen, then. So Sonia Bedford from Stephen Scown, or is it Scown? So Sonia's been involved in renewables for a very, very, very long time, a keen lover of wind turbines, and also a keen supporter of the community sector. Does a lot of volunteering for the community sector, so he's a perfect person to get on to talk about the legal aspects of this, and obviously, as we mentioned, around the planning as well. So over to you, Sonia.
Brilliant, thanks Alistair, and good morning everyone. And how amazing and wonderful it is to be in a wind webinar. Goodness, it's been a while, and I'm so happy that we're here and we're back and we're talking about wind and actual projects that are going on the ground. A little bit about my legal firm up on the screen there, but more importantly for the purposes of this seminar, Stephen Scown have been involved in wind for a very long time. Everyone likes to talk about the firsts, but we were involved in the first wind farm in England down at Delabole 30 odd years ago, and have been a strong supporter of wind for both landowners and developers ever since then. I first got involved in wind about 15 years ago with my first wind project, which actually didn't get consented, unfortunately, but since then have been involved in a good 50 odd wind projects, from tiny turbines for own use all the way up to large wind scale wind farm redevelopments up in Scotland and across the UK. I'm going to talk mostly about the legal agreements that are required for landowners if you are letting your land out for a wind farm or for even a community or single use site. Less focusing on the agreements if you're doing your own wind turbine, although we can talk about those in the Q&A, the additional agreements that would be necessary for turbine acquisition. And following on from Daniel, if you have identified your site as one which may be suitable for wind, you may wish to progress yourself with purchasing the wind turbine and proceeding, or you may wish to proceed with a developer or a community group who can take that development on for you. As Daniel mentioned, and the question that wind turbines that are currently viable and being installed where there isn't an electricity demand on site are very, very large scale wind turbines that are being looked at, and slightly beyond the means of most of us to spend the millions that would be required to put those turbines up. So partnering with another party is a good way in order to achieve that wind development on your site. It's also worth looking at those sites and those of you that may have solar already on your site. Wind is very compatible with the solar site, and we've certainly done a number of developments with wind and ground mount solar on both sites. There's just some additional considerations around shading that need to be looked at, but it's not precluding more development. As always, there's a large number of legal agreements that are going to be required if you are a landowner entering into a development for wind on your own land. I'm going to run through in a bit more detail the heads of terms, option, lease, and the way leave documents. But other things to consider are substation leases with Western Power or whoever your network operator is, and also looking at the due diligence over the land, as well as doing the constraint mapping. As Daniel showed, you also need to look at the title to the land, who owns it, what environmental impact there is on the land, what the land is currently being used for. Is it a brownfield site? Is it agricultural land? What grade agricultural land it is? And in some cases, it's important to look at whether or not you want to take a lease, or in fact, if you want to sell the site on to a developer in order to put the wind turbines up. If you're going into partnership with a community and a developer, the first document that will probably come across your email these days used to be sat around a nice kitchen table talking about these things. But the first document that will come across is a heads of terms. A heads of terms, I've seen so many different types over the years and drafted a fair few over the last 20 years. And they can be very brief or they can be very, very long. And in my opinion, it's important at early stages to get the terms down that are really meaningful. So finances to start with, land areas, and any other particular issues that you have around the site. Why have them? Because they set the scene for the whole of the rest of the negotiation. Wind projects, whether they're small or large scale, take a considerably long time from start to actual operation of turbine. So if you set the scene right at the start, then you're off on a good foot. Heads of terms aren't always legally binding and are not intended in the main to be legally binding, although you can make certain clauses of them legally binding. For example, we usually see confidentiality or exclusivity clauses legally binding. And I've put in there the use of an SPV, a special purpose vehicle. Generally, renewables projects are taken in separate individual companies, and that's nothing to be alarmed with. A lot of these companies are set up just to carry the renewables project and ring fence them. And it's pretty standard practice, and not something to be concerned about, that it's a brand new company that may be entering into an agreement with you. The next document that we'll come across will be what's called an option agreement. An option gives the developer or the community the ability to progress the project, having the security that the land is held for them should the planning be acceptable, and that the terms of the lease are agreed very early on. In the early days, even for single wind turbine sites, we were seeing quite big option fees paid by developers. We're now looking at much more financially constrained models for particularly small scale turbine sites, and we're seeing much lower option fees by necessity in order to get the project off the ground and let those upfront costs be spread as much as possible. But the key things, if you're a landowner, to be considering is the identification of the land on which the project should be built. Now, that might sound obvious, but an option needs to be quite a large area, because through the planning process, additional constraints might be found. And so it's important to look at the whole of the land area and to make sure that if you are the landowner, then that you're happy for that land to be tied up in that option for the length of the auction period, which could be, and for a wind project, anything up to 5 years. What do you do with the land during that option period? Can you continue to use the land as before? And a description of what's proposed. Is it a single turbine? Is it a wind farm? Is there going to be battery storage, connected solar? The right to obtain grid connection rights is also important, because, as Daniel rightly pointed out, one of the first things to go for in a wind development, as well as looking at the constraints, is the grid capacity. And it's important to get that grid capacity conversation going, and to ensure that nothing is done that will adversely affect that grid connection right. Often there is some control on the landowner's activities in the option period in relation to applying for other planning permissions on the site, anything which might affect the proposed wind development. So it's important to discuss all these things really, really early on. The option will have attached to it the eventual lease that will be entered into for the land over which on which the turbines are situated. Now, the question of how long the lease should be has changed very much now over the years. A wind project, wind turbines can be operational for a significant period of time. And normally you'd see the lease limited potentially for the length of the planning permission. In some cases, planning is time limited. For example, the Bristol City Council turbines at Avonmouth are time limited for 20 years, after which they need to be repowered or removed. And some cases you see permanent planning permissions. So when you're looking at how long the lease should be, it's important to consider how long you want the land to be tied up for, and also the viability of the turbines and the amount of time that they will be stood on the land. But generally around 25 years to 30 years is about average. You need to look at rent and rent reviews, whether you're going to be paid a profit share from the lease, or a flat rent for just the use of the land. Who's going to repair the turbine, and what's going to happen if the turbines fail or need reinstatement? Who gets the ability to terminate the lease and when? And that original party, whether you still want to contract with the original party throughout the term of the lease, or whether that there is an ability to transfer or sell the turbine sites, which is pretty normal. The permitted use, again, are you permitting just a turbine, or are you looking at battery storage, solar, and other new technologies that may come along? And also important to consider compound areas, crane areas, and all of the other things that go with a wind turbine development. Now, as Daniel mentioned, there often needs to be a long route of cabling to go from the turbines to the nearest point of connection or substation. And you may be contacted as a landowner purely to get an easement over your land for that cabling, or there may be a wind development happening in the area, or even an offshore wind development over which the cabling might run over your land. So again, there's really important considerations to look for that. And also Western Power or SSE or whoever the network operator is may also require you to enter into agreements with them for that cabling as well. And the question arises as to whether and what payments should be made for just hosting that cabling on the land, and who should be paying the legal costs for all of this, because obviously there is a fair amount of negotiation, and that goes through all of the legal documents. And important to understand from the outset who's going to pay for all the legal documents. I've just put on a slide here the considerations that my developer clients start looking at, which tie in with the constraints mapping that was identified earlier, all of the various points that are looked at when deciding whether to proceed with a site. And yes, as Daniel pointed out, access is one of those really key ones. I'm currently looking into a community wind development in my local area in Somerset, and had done all the initial constraint mapping, found my site, applied for some grant funding, and then was quite rightly pointed out, had I actually seen the 90-degree bend that came to the land on the way into the land site, and how on earth would I get a 4.5 megawatt turbine around a 90-degree bend, and had I factored in the costs of doing that. And it's often, even for experienced wind people, you get, well, I do, get very carried away with your project and looking at the project, and forget the very simple things about how you're actually going to get a turbine to your site. I've just added a few other considerations here for if you're looking at wind turbine developments on your land. There's a few other things to consider, how it affects your tax position, if you have other development opportunities on your land, for example, if it's available for housing, how will that fit in in the future with the proposed turbines? How do you want to manage the land in the future? Are there any existing rights or restrictive covenants on the land which might prevent the turbine from being installed? Do you have the title deeds for the land? Are there overage clauses on the land for that? I mean, for example, I've come across a number of sites where there may be minerals rights under the land which need to be considered, or where someone like the church commissioners have sold the land in the past and have put development clauses on the land going forward. But a few things to consider if you're looking at your site for wind development. And finally, I'm not going to run through the legal position on planning policy, because we have a planning expert available for you today, and Gemma is going to cover that. But I couldn't not briefly mention the planning policy in terms of how we're dealing with things on a legal side at the moment, and the reason that we haven't been actively involved as lawyers in as many wind sites for a while. With the fact that onshore wind development, as Alistair mentioned at the beginning, has effectively been put on hold by the written ministerial statement that was passed, requiring, which then went into the National Planning Policy Framework, which was the requirement to have areas identified for wind development in the local neighbourhood plan, and the additional requirement that the proposal must have the backing of the local community. Now, as a community energy practitioner, on initial reading, think, well, wonderful, of course we want to have the backing of the local community. But this is effectively a backing of the whole of the local community. Now, I've never seen any planning applications for any renewable projects, no matter how big or how small, have consent of a full community. There's always going to be issues to be dealt with and people who are objecting. And that and Dave later on is going to talk about the best way to proceed with that community engagement. So, in summary, development under this policy is theoretically possible and is going to be shown later on today. But the risk is a high barrier to pass, and there are possible routes through it, and we are seeing more planning coming in and more planning applications being made, particularly in areas where there are climate emergency declarations. But it is a hard process to get through at the moment, and I very much hope and foresee that policy will be changed going forward. So thank you very much for that whistle-stop tour. I'll be very happy to answer a question now.
Yeah, thank you, Sonia. I think we'll probably keep the question. Yeah, apologies, Stephen Snowden. I know you've got a couple there, and I think that Will's got a question. But if we could leave those to the end, because I just want to make sure we have enough time. But thank you, Sonia. That was fantastic overview of the legal aspects to this, and setting us up now for getting into the detail of the work, the case study that we have. So Gemma, if you're able to share your screen then.
Yeah.
So Gemma Melville from Landmark Practice, who have been involved with a lot of renewable projects in the area and nationally as well, and definite a very knowledgeable practice in all of this area. So Gemma, over to you.
Lovely. Okay. So I'm just going to give it, it's going to be a fairly whistle-stop tour as well, because we've got a lot to cover, but I'm going to go through a concept of what you're going to expect during the planning process. I'll have a brief look at the planning policy and how it impacts on what we're doing, who makes your decisions, and the key steps of stakeholder and community involvement, and then how your EIA and environmental studies tie into all of this as well. So, national and local policy. Well, planning applications must be decided in line with your local planning authority's development plan. And there's got to be very good reasons for this not to happen. So planning policy therefore sets the frame for your applications and should help inform the strategy for your application. The local development plan includes all adopted local plan policy, so local development framework, SAVE policies from old plans, supplementary planning guidance documents. But we've also got national policies in the form of the NPPF. And these are also material considerations, which are essentially matters that should be taken into account when deciding the planning application. There may also be neighbourhood plans that should be considered. And when you're putting your planning framework together, you want to check through your local plans and your neighbourhood plans carefully and consider whether there are also wider policies in those that are in support of wind. Different councils have different levels on those. Cornwall's got a lot of detail. Dorset leans on Cornwall. It's worth having a good look through and seeing what's available. Local planning authorities are also likely to have local development plan policies relating to renewables in itself, and also site-specific policies that will apply, for example, for landscape. There might be special landscape areas. Ecology, you've got your national designations, but also locally designated sites. Heritage designated areas such as conservation areas. And sites with particular environmental sensitivities will need to be considered carefully with justification of site selection and consideration of alternatives. And the ambition case study is a good example of this. It's worth remembering that development planning is really a balancing exercise. It's likely that most schemes that go into planning, let's face it, will be unable to tick all the policy boxes. So the name of the game is to be able to demonstrate that the benefits outweigh the impacts or any opposition, and that local concerns are being addressed and accounted for within the scheme that you're bringing forward. So we've already heard from Sonia regarding the key policy in the NPPF. We've got a couple of conditions that have to be applied. Ideally, they both have to be applied. So the sites need to be allocated within the neighbourhood plan, and you have to be able to demonstrate that the community's on board and that everything's been addressed. I won't go through that in detail again, apart from a quick comment that it shouldn't be seen as a bar to development as such. It's one material consideration. It's a key one for sure, and you need to think very carefully how you're going to try and tackle that. But it's one consideration amongst many others, and it has to be weighed as part of that planning balance. But as you can see, it does stress the importance of the local picture, and it kind of gives you a feel of what you can and should be doing at a local level to bring these projects forward. So we set the scene for what we can refer to as the planning context, and it's highly likely that this will identify a need for some environmental assessment work to inform your planning application. And an important consideration here for a lot of people is whether your wind project is going to need an environmental impact assessment or EIA. And the EIA regulations apply to development that could have significant adverse effects, basically. And the regulations specify a list of certain development types that will always need an EIA, and others that may need an EIA and must therefore be screened by the planning authority to determine whether the EIA is needed or not. And this screening process involves the planning authority reviewing the scheme against a set of criteria that are given in the regulations. And these consider the specifics of each development scheme as they come forward and help it decide whether significant adverse effects are likely to occur. Now, wind turbines are development that may need EIA, and the regulations set thresholds for the projects that should be considered or screened for EIA. And for winds, this is set at 2 or more turbines or a hub height of 15 metres or above. Now, when you see the general scale of turbines coming forward this morning, these days, the screening requirements likely to catch most wind turbines due to the hub height criteria alone. But depending on the location, single or 2 turbine schemes are unlikely to need an EIA, but larger schemes or those in sensitive areas such as AONBs or near to ecology designated sites are much more likely to need one. To find out whether you will need to run an EIA or not, you can make screening requests to the local planning authority to ask for a decision. These are free to submit and they're meant to be turned around in 3 weeks, but depending on the authority that can vary. And generally speaking, the more information you can put into a screening request, the better and more informed the opinion. So it's always worth doing your work up front if you can. So if an EIA is needed, then you'd be well advised to consult with the planning authority again to firm up the scope of studies that would need to go into that. But even when it's not needed and you get a negative screening opinion, wind turbine developments can still be expected to have some environmental effects, very likely. And a suite of environmental or technical reports informed by specialist surveys is likely to be needed to address any potential concerns that are raised by the council or consultees. And these reports would accompany the planning application. So for wind turbine developments, these are generally very likely to include ecology, landscape, heritage, probably depending on what's around, transport and access, because as we've heard, there are long, tricky things to get down narrow lanes and under bridges or over bridges. And also the more specialist areas, things like microwave links, aviation assessments, shadow flicker, and then the standard ones as well, possibly things like flood risk and ground conditions and drainage. So even if you don't need an EIA, there's still going to be a certain amount of work that needs doing. So once you've got your pack together, you've checked out your planning framework, you've got your strategy and you're making a submission, who makes the decision on these things? Well, minor planning applications are usually decided by senior planning officers at the council. But in other cases, and probably in most cases for wind turbines, the larger ones in particular, the planning officer will present a recommended decision to the committee made up of elected councillors, and only elected councillors can vote on the application. The officer will make a recommendation as to whether they consider the application should be allowed or refused. But it's worth noting that councillors don't always follow the officer's advice. both councillors and officers should make decisions and recommendations based on a planning basis. It shouldn't just be in sort of the led by comments that they're received, but they you know, this can be variable, but generally speaking, there should be a solid planning basis behind any decisions that come forward. And once the applications are validated and registered with the local planning authority, then the council has to consult and publicise and speak with people about them. And as part of this process, neighbours will be notified, and in some cases, applications will be advertised in the local paper. And this generally is intended to give the public the opportunity to comment and express their views on the schemes that have come forward. Who else is usually notified? The parish council is usually notified, and if there's a relevant county council, they'll be notified usually, and agencies such as the Environment Agency and Natural England will also be notified and consulted on the scheme. So there's quite a lot of consultation that will be done by the planning authority after the applications have been validated. But that's not to say that applicants can't engage in consultation at an earlier stage. And in fact, you know, as we've seen, community engagement is going to be key for onshore wind. And therefore, waiting for this stage, this is unlikely to be enough for onshore wind applications. And on that note, David will pick up next and speak a bit more about the recommended approach to communities in the context of the Ambition Lawrence Weston case study.
Thanks for that, Gemma. Thanks for handing over. Hi, my name's David Tudgy. I work for Ambition Lawrence Weston, and Dr. Charles Gamble as well. And we have set up Ambition Community Energy on behalf of Ambition Lawrence Weston. And Charles has got an industry expert from more than 30 years of working in the wind industry, and myself with 10 years as a community energy practitioner and 12 years as an environmental consultant. So if you take us to the next slide, Gemma, and I'll just introduce Ambition Lawrence Weston a little bit. So this is Mark Pepper. He's a development manager for Ambition Lawrence Weston. He founded and incorporated Ambition Lawrence Weston back in 2012, and it really came out of as a local resident, Mark Pepper being a local resident, looking to really secure the youth centre that he stood in front of there, to ensure that it had a successful future as a learning hub, and also creating a network for the community of Lawrence Weston. So they've got 45 plus organisations working with Lawrence Weston. So as a development manager, he's involved with lots of projects that he's bringing forward, such as a local supermarket they've successfully delivered, and a housing development project. So community energy was a new project that we came across. Mark Pepper and myself started working together back in 2014 through a Bristol Energy Network workshop on fuel poverty, which led to us working on projects and recruiting me as a community energy practitioner for Ambition Lawrence Weston. If you go to the next slide, Gemma, that's okay. So prior to this project, we were developing projects such as a thermal imaging project to assess cold homes in Lawrence Weston as high level fuel poverty. But they also were surrounded by wind turbines owned by other corporate entities, with some social benefits coming back to the community, but very marginal in comparison to what could be a greater benefit for the local community. So the community were keen to explore developing their own projects. They actually undertook an economic development plan where identified potential benefits of owning their own assets. And we worked with Bristol Energy Cooperative to develop a large solar farm adjacent to the community. And that was successfully completed in 2016. So what next was this wind turbine. So they had this vision to actually own a wind turbine and develop it to create the tangible benefits and mobilize community finance, and ensure the long-term development charity of Ambition Lawrence Weston to provide that learning resource, and also to assist Ambition and the community to work with the schools and get them involved in renewable energy as a career choice potential to look at broadening their ambitions. So next slide, please. Gemma, sorry. So what was needed to develop this project was a high level of community support for the project, and because of all the work we had done previously working with the community, they were very much on board, and it was them proposing this project to me and for me to reach out to identify consultants to work with me, and brought in Charles, who'd been working on other community energy projects in Bristol, who has that experience, and then identified the independent consultants we've heard from today so far. Well, sorry, from Gemma from Landmark. But I'll go through that in a bit more detail further on. But those are all the things listed there: the electrical grid connection, making sure the financial stack up, and the proven track delivery team. So it's that team is the crucial part to making sure your project will be successful. So identifying a team with that long history is of developing projects in the areas Gemma's team have, and Womble Bond Dickinson and the other planning agent as well. Pegasus. So that's your road to getting to planning permission, and that all those things need to be completed to achieve it. So can I have the next slide, Gemma? Yeah. So up until now, all developments were onshore wind developments were actually able to access subsidies such as a feed-in tariff or the contracts for difference, but that no longer exists since the government policy, which basically prevented a lot of onshore wind coming forward, because even if you do, because of the written ministerial statement. So the phase one of our project was to really look hard at how we might actually develop this strategy to achieve onshore wind, and that's what the Urban Community Energy Fund allowed us to do. That fund no longer exists. We literally got on the tail end of that, and we were supported by Centre for Sustainable Energy in our proposal, and that led to LB Planning, who advised us on our neighbourhood plan, and Womble Bond Dickinson helping us to really go through that written ministerial statement and understand exactly how we might bring forward an onshore wind turbine. So in parallel with that, we were also looking at the feasibility and potential sites, which Charles would discuss a bit further on. Next slide, please, Gemma. So this community engagement was identified in the ministerial statement as being crucial to ensuring that the evidencing that you have the full support of the community. So we did this in parallel to identifying sites, and while we were doing that, we were approached by Accolade Wines consultants, who were also looking to submit their own turbine at the time. Now, because adjacent to them, other turbines had been brought forward, they were able to go ahead without an environmental impact assessment and complete their process in 2017 or 18, I think. Sorry, they completed their application in 2016 and 2017, which allowed them to progress one of the first wind turbines since the ministerial statement was written. But they would not have been able to get that without the support of the community, and so that's what we provided. So while we were developing our project, there was no designated areas within Bristol, but the local plan does promote onshore wind, and so that's where Accolade Wines were able to use that. So that gave us a route map for our project. Please, next slide, please, Gemma. To go through this. So with community engagement, making sure that the community's on board is essential. And so because we'd already developed our own neighbourhood plan without the ministerial statement in mind, there so much work's involved in that, we wouldn't want to reopen that and start a new one. So we pursued point of looking at our community plan and updating that to include community energy and community energy projects, and breaking down the questions so that we couldn't be caught up in any legal action against us for persuading the community to have an onshore wind turbine, and saying they're going to get the benefits for that, because that's been held up in court in other wind turbine projects. So it's important to separate out your questions to make sure that the community genuinely support renewable energy on onshore wind, but also support the idea of developing one. So if you go to the next slide, please, Gemma. So
1 or 2 minutes, David.
How many minutes, sorry?
Well, 1 or 2 maximum.
Oh, okay. I'll whip through these very quickly then. So this is the important point, is making sure that you've actually got your volunteers working with you. You've broken that question down, so you've asked them if they support renewable energy, and then if they support on your idea and concept. So if you carry on down. And so keep going through that. So those are the sort of things Charles will go to. And then once you've defined your site, you actually need to make sure you follow the policy guidance on pre-application consultations, make sure you've gone through the statutory stakeholder processes, make sure you've gone through all the processes that Gemma's mentioned earlier, so that your evidence community support is robust. And next slide, please. So the written ministerial statement, sorry, I've got more slides than I can probably manage to get through now. So if you keep going down one more. So yes, a lot of local plans are being reviewed at the moment. So look at contacting your local authority, encouraging them to update their local plan, but don't be put off if they're not engaging with you to update their local plan, because you can lean on existing policies. But if you're looking for updating your local plan, look at places like Hull, who have designated certain areas which can do that. But from a parish level, you can also create a neighbourhood development plan, which is specific to your local community. You can find out what their wants and needs are. If you can go to the next slide, sorry, John, and keep going down. Sorry, one more. And well, I'll go back up one. Go right two. So anyway, so what I'm trying to get across is, don't be put off. You can achieve something, bringing the community with you by identifying what their wants and needs are, and including the questions around what climate action plans they'd like to develop. Those are the sorts of things you can do at a local level. It involves your community, and keep them engaged throughout the process. Get them excited about the project, and if involve them, make sure that there are genuine community benefits. And when they see the wind turbine turning, they won't think that's in my eyesight. They'll be thinking that's generating energy for my local community. That's doing something to regenerate and provide jobs and build back better. So that's what I wanted to get across today, is involve your local community. So I'll let Charles carry on where I left off. Sorry for hogging there.
Thank you, David. Back up one, please, Gemma. Right, thanks. Good morning. This is Charles Gamble. Thank you for having me on this webinar. I've been in the wind business since the 80s in the UK and North and South America and Asia. So crawling over turbines, designing them, and being involved in creating some of the new technology you might find in them. So in respect of this project, I've worked happily with David, and as that team grew, and Mark and so on. But long before we engaged a number of excellent professional partners, some of which are here, before we had any funding, we got a call from the council, or David did, to review a long list of parcels of land as a feasibility study. They were quite small parcels of land, which is fine because wind turbines don't need much space at all. They make dramatically more energy and hence revenue per hectare, as Dan has said, than anything else by a huge margin. The initial thoughts from the council, their ambition that we discerned were for small scale machines, domestic wind or medium scale turbines. And that was, can you go back up, please? Hold on. But okay, sorry. And so David introduced me to Lawrence Weston, and we saw this as an opportunity for the local community and started to whittle those options down. Next slide, please, Gemma. Thank you. So the Bristol City area, of course, for which we had this entire option of parcels of land, is built up and lacks accessible natural features like low hills where the wind speed might be higher. But on the estuary, however, we found large areas of sort of industrial land, particularly within the local enterprise zone, which were a better candidate. And I used the NOABLE database. It's a boundary layer database, which Dan has mentioned. There are finer resolution models now from Gardasan, one of my former employers. But NOABLE gave the 1 kilometer square resolution to put contour lines of wind speed. And obviously, the closer you got to the estuary, the more windy it was. We didn't look very much south of the Avon. We tended to stay within inside that enterprise zone. So it was natural to think of Ambition Lawrence Weston's community plan, Lawrence Weston being just outside that zone, and to think that we could put these things together and support their local ambitions. But you might ask why we focused on wind. It's not just because I've been in it for a long time, but the wind speed is absolutely crucial. A difference of 1 meter per second can make almost a 40% difference to the energy produced on the same site. And it is the one thing you can't change. Next one, please, Gemma. So we narrowed down the possible parcels of land, taking it, we were unfunded basically. We didn't have any real technology, simple maps, looking at databases, talking to people, and a lot of walking around fields, looking at roads, power lines, bridges, and so on, consulting databases on ecological and archaeological and other constraints. But we did take the decision, if we're going to build one, we might as well make it a big one. I mean, a big one because we thought the revenues would justify the amount of efforts we were clearly going to have to go through. Next one, please. The practical consideration, I mean, I'm an electrical engineer, so we got some funding, as David has mentioned, from the Community Energy Fund. We looked at grid connections. It's a major consideration wherever you are. Daniel has covered this. Decades ago, you could walk across and look at 11,000 volt power lines and say, I think that'll work. You can't do that now. Turbines have grown up, and only some at 500 kilowatts, which is what we call medium wind, can connect at, the farm level, 415 or 690 volts, and only in the special circumstances. For megawatt scale turbines, high voltage connection necessary, and this has been mentioned by others earlier, but early engagement with the district network officer and operator, in our case, Western Power Distribution, was something we started to do. And of course, it's crucial in terms of timing to have a grid offer going through the process, because they are allocated on a first come, first served basis. Thank you, Gemma. Next one. Throughout all this entire process, I set out from the beginning a risk register, you could call it, which projects of the initially quite a few were likely to go ahead, and we did a simple red, amber, green traffic light on them, and quite a lot had a lot of red to start with. It was quite disappointing. I've anonymized the data here, but there are obviously wind speed, environmental issues. This is on an amateur basis before we got involved with Gemma at Landmark. Who owned the land? What's their attitude? Is a grid connection there? Could there be some local consumption of energy? What other community assets might be damaged by the wind turbine? What are the likely soil conditions? Is it in a floodplain or a granite? Is it feasible to expect to get planning permission given the various constraints around infrastructure, gas pipelines, power lines, and so on, residences, noise, visual, the whole thing, and just rating these on a fairly simplistic basis. Narrowed it down to one site in Avonmouth. Thank you. Yeah, the next one. just a word on turbines. We started with small or medium scale turbines, and only after discussing with ALW, I decided we should go for the big one. And so that's one here. The turbine in the middle is the one we've got planning permission for. It's 150 meter tip height, which is, I don't know if Daniel might know, I think it's the highest tip height that's been permitted in the UK, certainly in England. And tip height and hub height is important. There's more wind up here than there is down here. So this is an EWT DW52. It's about half the tip height. It isn't quite half the tip height. It's about half of the rotor diameter. The tower is about 70% as high. And you'll see these all over. They're very successful. I love the technology. Both turbines here are direct drive. It's quiet, no gearboxes, no oil, super efficient. And they came from the same sort of technical stables in the beginning. But of course, the energy from the smaller one is on the same site about a ninth of the larger turbine. So, you know, it's a judgment to make. It's harder to get permission for one of these than one of these, the larger than the smaller. But the profitability of the smaller machine, taking all into consideration, may still be very good on the right side. Next one, please, Jim. So do the financials stack up? Well, I built a sort of deep financial model based on my experience of what's possible. And I was able to compare different models of turbines. This is as we were moving through, and we had engaged with Gemma and others. We were talking to turbine suppliers, and it's important to make informed decisions and discriminate between the various providers. And there's about 4 or 5 of large turbines you can get to in this country for the large megawatt scale. Their details, performance is generally confidential. You need a non-disclosure agreement to get that data. Putting stuff off the web doesn't work. It won't tell you the right answers. You need to know the capital cost. And of course, that varies with time and exchange rate, as all of these bits of technology are imported at the moment. And the turbine is about 65 to 70% of the total capital cost. So it's a big decision to make. So the comparison models that we had, and not just looking at 1 or 2 factors, but all of the financials involved, including its capital cost and its operating cost and other factors. The rest of the stuff you need on the site is called the balance of plant. And the estimates for this are hugely dependent upon local conditions, like soil conditions make a big difference to foundation costs, access roads, and lengths of track. So that's a significant consideration. So those are the 2 parts, if you like, that go into the capital cost. But in the project cost, Sonia has mentioned, for instance, the legal work required. There can be significant legal costs as you go through. So working with an experienced legal team is vital, and you should budget for, finances for that correct quality of legal work at the right time. Finance itself, project finance, doesn't come free, and raising it involves costs. Insurance costs money. All of this should be built into your financial model, as we did. Then assuming you build it, your operating cost over the 25 or 30 years is another part of the model. And you've got operation and maintenance for the turbine, land rent, community benefits accounting, and so on and so on and so on, all to build it, as well as paying off the equity shareholders or the debt. It's a complex model, but we built that, and we've shared that with Triodos Bank and others.
1 more minute, Charles, if you can.
Okay, so all that went to the model, and we decided to take the Avonmouth site forward, and with Gemma and everybody else, and won. Last slide, please. So the timescales and the complexities of wind project we understand as a little community group, and And the early phases, of which there's about 6, pre-planning and site selection and planning permission, are the hardest and riskiest phases. So after that, it all becomes sort of almost downhill. But in summary, this has been a quick canter through a grassroots community-driven development without the support of Ambition Lawrence Western and the people around there, and without the drive to assist them in their, by means of real revenue in the model and plan, to bring people out of fuel poverty and the rest, this project wouldn't have been possible. So thank you for listening. We think we've shown how it can be done. I'm very happy to answer questions at the end.
Great, thank you, Charles. Thank you, David, and thank you, Gemma. Gemma, if you could just stop sharing your screen, that'd be great, and then we'll move to Q&A. Great, Gemma, actually, if I could just ask, and apologies if I've missed this then. So, following the great work by Dave and Charles then, Gemma, there was no dissenting voices then from the community in question during the planning application?
I don't believe there was. We had concern raised by Seabank Power Station, which took a bit of work, which Dave and Charles worked very hard to give them comfort that there was no risk of the power station. But to my knowledge, there were no objections received on the community side of things at all.
Yeah, that was the only objection, the Seabank Power Station.
Fantastic. And Gemma, was it, maybe being slightly cynical, there are wind turbines in Avonmouth, but when this planning application got to the ministerial level, even if he or she actually looked at it, would that have been taken into consideration? If you were trying to put this in a bit of land, you've got the community behind you, but there's no other wind turbines around, is that going to be harder?
It should all come out in the planning balance.
Okay. So
and in the reporting. So yes, that site is an interesting one, because although we are required to look at landscape by the nature of the beast, basically, it's very hard to get away from putting a wind turbine in and not considering landscape and visual effects. It's not a very sensitive landscape environment. So landscape, although it was managed, wasn't an EIA topic and was generally a fairly straightforward part of that process. That's not to say that the landscape isn't locally valued by the people that live there. So it's that probably was less of a consideration that it should have been. But really, by the time it gets up to that level, everything should have been thrashed out in the planning process, really.
Yeah, I know that for my daughter, seeing those wind turbines makes the journey up the M5 slightly better. It's been less over the years, unfortunately, but it does help when we're in a traffic jam a bit. Right, just to go to a few questions then. So, Als Parker then, Gemma, sorry, another one for you, Gemma. Do you recommend that a developer requests a screening opinion, even if they know an EIA will be required, as a means of starting the communication with the LPA? Local Planning Authority, or should the developer go straight into the LPA with an EIA, environmental
assessment?
Discussion?
Sure. There's nothing to say that you can't, but there's always a cost involved in putting a screening request together. And what we did with this one was, we knew, given the location near to the Severn Estuary, which is a European designated site for nature conservation, it was going to need an EIA. It was very, very unlikely not to. And we'd had pre-application discussions with the council already where they've made their concerns known, even if they hadn't formally screened it. So for this site, we put in a scoping request, and we acknowledged within that we considered it was going to be an EIA project. But we used the scoping request to tailor the scope down to aspects that we thought were really significant in the context of the estuary. So it focused on ecology and ornithology, so your birds and your bats and everything else that moves around. And then we looked at ground conditions and contamination by way of a potential linkage pathway to the estuary, and noise for disturbance effects on birds and species that are used in the estuary primarily. So we focused it down as far as we could, which is really beneficial in terms of the client, because it minimises the cost that's associated with an EIA. It helps the authority as well to focus on the absolute key matters of the EIA and aids their decision-making process. And it takes some of the load off of them too, because reviewing an environmental statement is quite a big piece of work. So the more focused it can be, the better all round, really.
Okay, great. Thanks, Gemma. And Dan, maybe a question for you then. Do you keep track of planned transmission upgrades? What do you think the best approach is for developers to make most of these?
We do keep track to a certain extent. Pretty much all the projects that we're involved with aren't connected at transmission level. Transmission connection projects are significantly large. I think, and the majority of the ones that we deal with are distribution connected. Distribution upgrades are more important to keep track of. And often enough, those distribution upgrades are done out of necessity because there are so many people, developers, whether it's generation developers or consumption developers, wanting to connect to that network. So yeah, keeping a good eye out for where upgrades are being done is obviously a decent way of identifying locations where the fight is going to be easier to get a connection to the grid network.
Great, thank you, Daniel. David, a question from Will Houghton. Did you say that there were no areas identified as suitable for wind development in the local plan at that time? I was just wondering on lessons learned in terms of getting past the 2015 WMS.
Yeah, I'd have to quote the actual document to be able to give you the exact words, but it wasn't. Yeah, there wasn't a site identified within the local plan as written in the written ministerial statement. So, but there were policies that support onshore wind in the original local plan, which we lent upon. And as the local plan that's updates coming into force now, it does need to include areas designated for wind within that plan going forward. So I think it's still important where local plans are coming forward that community groups and anyone who's got an interest in declaring a climate emergency. I think that's the whole country really, but they actually encourage sites to be identified, or at least look for examples where good practice where they've identified suitable sites. But I would say even if an area isn't identified and you'd like to develop a particular area, you can within your own local area create a neighbourhood plan, and you can just have specific policies just for renewable energy. So you don't have to go through a long drawn out process. You could go for a couple of identified policies and get those supported, and it's about the majority of those policies being supported, not necessarily. So you could have a 60-40 balance. It doesn't need to be everybody in that instance to support that policy change happening.
Okay, thank you, David. Gemma, a question from Tom Broughton. A colleague analysed the MPPF, which stated that resources within a development should be optimised. He thought that the solar resource of a housing development should be optimised with solar PV on its roofs. Is that a correct interpretation of the MPPF? Slightly cheeky, Tom. That's a different technology, but if it's a quick one, Gemma, you can answer that one.
I think it's a good question. I'm not sure it's one I can answer, to be honest. I don't know if any of my panelist colleagues have got an interpretation of that one.
Nope, we'll pass on that. And then from Kate Cantwell, for David, it's not unusual for past plans to leave out IDing sites, but I think lots of LPAs are starting to be more proactive, as have been encouraged to declare climate emergency. You want to comment on that? Oh, sorry, it's David Tudgy, sorry.
So when they've identified, she's suggesting they've identified sites or in their local plans. Sorry, I'm not sort of summarise the question slightly differently. Sorry.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's not unusual for past plans to leave out identifying sites, but I think a lot of LPAs are starting to be more proactive, as have been encouraged to declare a climate emergency. So yeah, are LPAs looking to identify sites? You know, I know that's not.
I think that's where I think Sonia might be able to answer that better. She might have worked with local authorities that are doing this at the moment.
Go on, Sonia.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Daniel might be able to talk a little bit about what Cornwall is currently doing as well on designated wind areas. But it is certainly the case, and Bath and North East Somerset have put in a wind designated area, so for their local plan proposals as well, and especially designated areas are being looked at by a number of local authorities. I think it's interesting what Dave said about, you know, neighbourhoods being able to put in specific identified policies for renewables, starting from the ground up. But if you can get, and as we've talked about, the panel has talked about before, we all got very excited about being able to get together to talk about wind, and have talked about a lot of things. But in fact, it should designating areas for wind, should that not just be everywhere that's viable for wind? So rather than actually saying, well, we want a wind turbine here in this one little spot, but nowhere else, rather the other way, it should be done the other way around, and finding the areas which would host wind and then designating those as suitable areas. But certainly I think those authorities which are serious about their climate emergencies are definitely revisiting their designations, and we have seen, I think, 2 planning applications which have gone through using climate emergency as a consideration.
And I'd just like to,
sorry, Dave, we'll have to leave it there, unfortunately.
Can I just concur very quickly with that, though, that without support, though, these communities can't actually develop those neighbourhood plans, and actually communities like Lawrence Weston are lucky that they've got investment from a local from a national charity, the local trust, to be able to do that. So unless they've got that resource, I don't see how they can do it. So it does need rethinking.
Right. No, thank you, David. That's a good point to add. Grand. Well, somebody asked a question. No, I think that's more of a comment, but I say we'll have to move on. There are some other questions that have been asked, and thank you very much to the panelists to have answered those specifically in the Zoom window box thingy. So have a look there to catch on some of the other conversations. And say apologies, we've run out of time, but thanks so much to our speakers for what's been a really a fantastic webinar, just from the point of view that hopefully you've done lots of good stuff, and hopefully you're going to stimulate more good stuff to happen. So let's hope this is really is the start of something new within the country. Also like to thank my colleague Kate Granger, who's managed to herd the speakers into this event and get us where we are now. Kate will be sending out information, I say, with the link to the recording if you want to watch it again, but also for the AgroRES newsletter, which you might want to see, and also so you can find out about more stuff that we're doing through AgroRES. One of the things we've got planned, we haven't got a date yet, Kate needs a break, but is going to be doing, our next webinar is going to be on soil carbon capture or carbon sequestration, which we think could be a really important thing for landowners, could be a potential a really important service that they could provide companies. We've talked about net zero. Loads of organizations out there are going to need to do carbon offsetting. Carbon sequestration is a very good way of doing that, and local solution as well will be really good as well. So yeah, so that'll be January, February, I think, but we'll get more information out to everybody. But again, thanks so much to the speakers. Thanks to all for attending and for being enthusiastic attendees. Brilliant. Cheers. Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.